When it's time to edit an image, here are some tools and techniques no power user should be without. The most common image editing tasks involve manipulating the brightness and/or contrast of an image. Photoshop offers equivalents of traditional darkroom techniques, but with an even greater degree of precision. We'll begin this lesson with a look at the Levels tool. We'll begin in our Chapter 3 folder, so let's open that folder and choose the file called Levels. Now, a bit of housekeeping before we get started. At the end of Chapter 2, we had set our ruler units to percents in order to create a batch action. Let's set that back now to inches, and instead of going up to Preferences, I'm going to show you an alternate way to do that. The first thing we need to do is show the rulers, and the shortcut to do that is Control-R on Windows, that's Command-R if you're on a Mac. And with the rulers present, we simply right-click, that would be Control-click on a Mac, and select instead of percent, choose inches. And there we go, we've set our ruler units back to inches. Now we can hide our rulers again. Shortcut is Control-R on Windows and Command-R on the Mac. Now let's take a look at Levels. We're going to create a new adjustment layer. Simply click on the Levels icon. Now with the Levels tool, what we can do is quickly and easily identify pixels at the same or similar brightness level while simultaneously changing that brightness level. We've got an image here that's flat and dull with very little contrast, and in our Levels adjustment panel we've got three sliders. If we move over here to the white point slider and drag it to the left, what we're doing is reassigning pixel values. So every pixel that's located at a brightness value of 229 is now automatically mapped to maximum white, which is 255. So we can see that that's brightened up our highlights, and if we go and click on the black point slider, we can do a similar thing to the shadows. If we click here and drag in to the right, what we're doing is remapping our darker pixels. Every pixel at a value of 19 and darker now gets automatically changed to a brightness level of 0. And we've got this midpoint slider here, or gamma slider. If we drag this to the right, what we're doing is changing the definition of midtones. All of these pixels that were brighter than a midtone residing here above this midpoint slider are now darkened so that they are at midtone levels. If we dragged it to the left instead, we would take pixels that were previously darker than a midtone and brighten them so that they are at a midtone value. A lot of people like to think of this as the contrast slider, because if we drag it to the left, we're lowering the image contrast. As we drag it to the right, we're increasing the contrast. So let's choose something right about here. Looks pretty good. And you can see if we toggle the preview off and on simply by clicking on this eyeball icon, we started with a flat, dull image, and now we've punched it up. We've got a lot more saturation, much better contrast, and it's a much richer image. There's our before, there's our after. Now the Levels tool is fine to use for images that are destined only for screen output. It's a fast, easy, and intuitive way to work. The problem is that it's a fairly blunt editing tool. It's kind of like writing calligraphy with a jackhammer. Notice that what we did by moving these sliders was we actually clipped values. With the highlights, we took all of these unique highlight values. There were a lot of pixels at a level of 229 and higher, and we mapped them all to a single value of 255. 255 again is maximum white and includes no detail. So while we've got a nice bright punchy image, we've lost a lot of detail. And it's not so bothersome on screen, but if we were to print this, we would have a lot of areas in our image that would just have no ink laid down. It would just be a hole on the page. And similarly with shadows, we clipped a lot of shadow values here. Now if your images are destined for the web, where they're not going to be that large in terms of size, and if they're only going to be viewed on a monitor, the Levels tool can give you some quick down and dirty results. But when you want to make a high quality print, which is much more demanding than screen output, you really need to have a way of working with much greater precision. Fortunately, we have the Curves tool, which will give us much more precise control over how we move our pixels. So let's close this image. We don't have to save it. I'm just going to choose Control W on Windows. That would be Command W on Mac. And we don't want to save this, so we'll hit no. And let's go back to our Chapter 3 folder and open the file Curves. Now here we've got a shot of Mount Fuji in Japan. It's very flat, dull, low contrasting. And let's add a curves adjustment layer here and see how we can change that. Now what we're going to do with the curves tool is set our highlight and shadow values. In essence, we're going to determine how bright our brightest whites are going to be and exactly how dark our darkest blacks are going to be. Now to do that, we need to quickly and easily identify where our brightest and darkest pixels are in the image. To do that, I'm going to hold down the Option key while I click on the white point slider. If you're on Windows, that would be the Alt key. Notice that the entire screen turns black. And as I drag to the left, we're watching for the first pixels that show up. And you can see there, along the dome of Mount Fuji, those are the first pixels to appear on screen, meaning that those are the brightest pixels in the image. So if I let go of the mouse, you can see here that along this ridge on either side are where my brightest pixels reside. Now I'm going to drag this white point slider back. We're not editing the pixels yet, we're just taking a diagnostic look to find out where we're going to make our edits. And let's do the same with this black point slider. I'm going to again hold down the Alt key on Windows, Option key on the Mac, and drag to the right. The screen is entirely white, but as I drag, you can see pixels appear. And right over in this area is where our darkest pixels reside. So I've got my darkest pixels over here and my brightest pixels up here along the edge of Mount Fuji. I'm going to set this black point slider back. And now we're finally ready to start editing this image. We're going to start by clicking the On Image Adjustment tool, and hovering the mouse over the image area, we're going to locate our deepest, darkest shadows, those pixels that first showed up when we dragged the black point slider. Somewhere right about here looks good. Notice that in the Curves panel, as I move the mouse, that hollow circle updates in real time. That's identifying the pixels located directly beneath this cursor and where they fall along the curve. So if I know I'm looking for some shadow pixels, I want to move the mouse until I find something that puts that hollow circle down towards the bottom left. So that looks pretty good for my shadows. So I'm simply going to click. And when I click, that places a point right there for my shadows. Now before I move that point, what I'm going to do is find a highlight area. Again, I'm going back to the area that I identified in the previous step. Right there looks pretty good. You can see the hollow circle along the curve is over towards the top right, so that means I am indeed in my highlight range, and I'm going to click to place a point here. Now what I want to do with these 2 points is I want to move them. Because we have the On Image Adjustment tool selected, I can simply click on the location where I place the point and drag up. Notice that lifts the curve, and that's also brightening the highlights in the image. Now I'm going to do this just visually here to taste. Right about there looks pretty good. Notice that unlike with the Levels tool, we're not setting pixels here to maximum brightness. We're not setting any values to 255, for example. In fact, if you take a look at the Curves panel, you can see that black square on the curve. As long as that square does not butt up against the top horizontal axis, we still have at least some minimal detail in our highlights. We'll stay just about here. That looks pretty good. But you can see the overall image has brightened up. What we want to do now is select the point where we click to place our shadows and darken those. Now instead of hunting around until I place the hollow circle directly over that point, here's what you can do. You can use a keyboard shortcut. On the keyboard you want to press the plus key. Pressing the plus key repeatedly will cycle you through every single point along that curve. So if I start up here in my highlight point and press plus once, twice, a third time, I've now got my shadow point selected, and with that point selected, I can now press the down arrow key on my keyboard. Watch this. My shadows are now getting darker. Of course, if I had pressed the up arrow key, my shadows would be lightening instead. But what I want to do is make them darker. And much like with the highlights, as long as I keep that black square from touching the bottom horizontal axis, I'm still maintaining usable detail in my shadows. And right about there looks pretty good. Now let's take a step back for a moment and review what we've done. We've selected our highlights and made them brighter. Then we've selected our shadows and made them darker. And you can see what a huge difference this has on the image. Now what about these tones right around here in the middle? Right around here below the snow line of Mount Fuji, this area looks a little bit flat to me. So I'm simply going to click with the On Image Adjustment tool still selected, and I can simply drag down with the mouse. That's going to darken these midtone values here. And I'm just going visually until the image looks pleasing. So there we go. Let's take a look at the before and after. Here's where we started, flat, dull, low contrast, and with just 3 points on a curve, we've gone to there. The Curves tool is really phenomenal, and it allows you to do very, very precise editing. Again, the difference between working with the Levels tool was in Levels, we were setting values to maximum white and maximum black. With the Curves tool, it's very easy to retain detail in the shadows and highlights. We can set them darker and lighter respectively, but we don't have to map them to maximum white or to maximum black. So when you go to make a print of this file, you have access to the full range of detail in the image, from your shadows all the way